Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. Now, I've been reading a lot on the internet that people tend to struggle with coming up with a black opening to defeat white, especially if you're sub 2000 elo. But I think I can help you out. So, there's this opening that I used to play as a junior player. It was invented by a player called David Norwood, and there was actually a Foxy opening video about it in the early 90s. But basically, it's just when white plays e4. There's two moves you can play. You can either play c6 or g6. After playing c6, white plays d4, and black can now play the move g6. And this Foxy opening video is actually dubbed the modern, but it's dead good, and I recommend playing it if you're sub 2000 elo. Now, I think Nakamura and Carlson have played this in a few games that I've seen on the internet. Good for blitz, good for bullet, and I still play it to this day. It's a very good idea though. The point behind it is after white plays moves like knight to c3, black can now just play d6. What we're hoping for here is for white to play the move f4, because after f4 we can lock everything down with this move d5, because after white plays e5 and overexpands, it's a closed position and black dominates the white squares. So look at all these pawns, all on white squares. This bishop will drop into one of these squares here, and white's got a struggling position because white's got a very nice centre here, but where's this bishop going? It's blocked in by its own pieces, and it's going to be very hard for white to attack now if black plays this very correctly anyway. So the point behind this now is after e5, black can play the move h5. So what does this do? It stops the move g4. So it stops white from expanding even further. And we get a nice game now. So for instance, in most positions now, white usually plays the move knight to f3. And black can just play bishop to g4, pinning the knight. And let's say a normal move like h3. Then we take, queen takes, and after e6, everything is locked down. Black's got the two knights against the two bishops, but in this position the two knights are actually a lot better. So I did go through that rather quickly. So let's go back. So the point is after g6, after knight c3, you can play the move d5 as well if you really want to in this position. So you can play d5 here, but after e5 and then h5, white doesn't technically have to play f4, and f4 is a pretty key move. If he plays f4, it's pretty terrible, but in this position, white could play the move bishop to e3, for instance, and this pawn system doesn't really make that much sense in this type of position. After knight c3 as well, you could also play bishop g7, which is a wise move. So after bishop g7 here, you could just wait for white to play f4 and then play d5 and e5. But now the bishop is actually on g7, and it's actually a lot better on f8. You actually gain a tempo by playing d6 first, because after f4, then d5 and e5, your bishop is now on f8, and that's kind of where you want it to be after you move the bishop out and play e6 at a later date. So I've rambled on a bit there, so let's have a look at a game. A good game to follow is it was by GM Federikov 93 versus Dr. Nickenstein, which obviously is Magnus Carlsen. So how did this game go? Well, white played knight to f3 and Magnus played the move knight to h6. And this is the typical idea you want to do. You want to play the knight out. It can come to these squares here. It can come to f5 or g4, and the bishop will come to one of these squares as well. Quite an easy system to learn. So after bishop to e3 in the game, Magnus played bishop g4, pinning the knight. White hits the bishop, and Magnus plays a very sneaky move, knight to f5, hitting the bishop on e3. Once it moves away, now black's forced to take, queen takes, and now comes the key move. White's threatening to play g4, and in these lines you want to play this move h4. The knight supports the pawn. The pawn stops this white pawn from progressing up the board, because if he does, we'll play it en passant. Play continued on then with bishop to d3. e6 is played by Magnus. knight drops back to e2, and black plays bishop to e7. And the point of this opening is actually it's very simple. So black's got a really nice pawn chain going on. All these pawns are on white squares. The knight's on a very nice outpost, and this pawn on h4 stops white from progressing down this side of the board. The point though is that black will probably never castle. Instead, black could hide their king onto g7, just leave it in the centre. And if white castles queenside, start attacking up this side of the board with moves like b5, a5, queen b6, or knight to d7. Let's see how Magnus played on though. So after c4, takes, bishop takes, and then just knight to d7. White castled in this position. Magnus played knight to b6, hitting the bishop, which dropped back, and now he puts another knight on a nice outpost in the centre of the board. So white continued, but already this is given as even by Stockfish. And Magnus demonstrates black's idea perfectly, just plays king f8, knight c3, and the king is really safe on g7. White played knight to e4, and now a5, expanding, a4 to stop the expansion. But now queen b6, hitting the bishop. The bishop is protected by the queen, so white plays king to h2. Now, black's got a really good position here. Could have played, according to Stockfish, the best move was knight to e3 here, because after bishop takes, queen takes bishop could have been played. Instead though, Magnus just played a normal move, played a rook into the centre, rook d3 was played, rook d7, rook c1. And we get into this position with Carlsen playing knight to b4, hitting the rook. White takes on d7, and black recaptures. Technically, white's actually slightly better now, but as the game continued on, it got a bit mad. Black played knight takes d4, and the game sort of went a bit crazy here with, I guess it was a blitz game, it must have been a time scramble, but eventually Magnus did win with quite a bit of a cheapo here. Takes the bishop, plays knight there, hits the rook, so the rook moves, and unfortunately white missed this move, knight to f8, forking the king and the queen. But we didn't really want to see the game fully, we just wanted to see this sort of position here. This is the sort of setup you get with this opening. Let's go back. So again, it's just playing c6, g6. Of course, after knight c3 and then d6, white doesn't have to play f4. They could play a normal move like knight to f3 here, or bishop to e3, in which case you would just continue normally, bishop g7, queen d2. And in this type of position you can play b5 and just develop normally. Typically you would get into a position like this. I've seen this many times with white playing f3 and getting into a very strong position. They want to try and focus their bishop onto h6. But again, black's got a decent position here. You just play knight to f6, develop normally, queen b6, a5. You can even play h5 here. So it's a very nice position in game. There are some other demonstrative games here. So I had a look at another one. This was a blitz game played in the year 2002. And again, we see a similar structure. Black's got all the pawns on white squares. The bishops come to g4. Bishop went to e2 to stop the pin, and now black continued on with move like knight to h6. Now this was a blitz game, but again we see what black wants to achieve here. So lots everything in, all the pawns are on white squares, very easy to play. But actually white's a good player, so they play g3, which is probably the best by test here. What white really wants to do is play g3. It stops black from playing h4 here. So white's next move will probably be h3. That's the best way to play it for white anyway. But black plays pretty well. Plays knight d7. Queen d2 is played. I don't know why he plays a6. I'm not sure about that one. White plays h3 anyway, so forces black to take off. But now we have knight to f5. Bishop retreats backwards. And again, black's got a very nice position. Nothing wrong with this position at all. It is a blitz game though, so it does get a bit messy, and actually black's quite lucky in this game. I think black does play some weakening moves, but all in all, this is the sort of position you can get against very strong players. There's nothing wrong with these type of positions. Let's have a look at one more example then. So we get into another game where black just played knight to h6 here. This time the bishop's on d3. White does indeed play h3. But takes his play, takes, and again black plays this move h4. Stops white from playing g4, of course. Play continued on with knight to e2, e6, blockading everything, and now c3. Black plays knight to f5 once again. There's attack, a capture, pawn takes, and this is absolutely fine for black as well. The point being is though that this pawn really limits the involvement of the pieces. The rook on h8 protects the pawn, also stops this queen from infiltrating. Very important. Bishop e3 was played in the game, knight d7, and now g4. Forces black to take here, but black's got a very solid structure. This is the type of positions you'll probably see a lot if you play this position a lot. So the bishop controls this square, the rook controls this square, and in a lot of games that I've played, I usually just launch these pawns up the board. So let's fast forward and see what happened in this game. There was king e2, queen b6, and quite a few checks. But again, black's got a good position. There's a lot of trading going on. But we see the structure in the endgame. Look at this terrible bishop for white. This is typical. All black pawns blockading this bishop in, and the knight is superior in a lot of these closed positions. And you'll learn a lot from playing these closed positions, especially playing with the knights. This is one advantage to playing this. If you're a sub 2000 ELO player, you will get a lot better understanding in closed positions. I think this actually comes into an endgame, and the queens get swapped off eventually. Here we go. Eventually, black does win it. Oh yeah, this is the game black won on time, I think. So he didn't play it very well this endgame. Should have won, to be honest. The knight was a lot better than the bishop. He did win the game eventually with a cheapo. Obviously, white lost on time here. That's quite funny. But black was better, I think, in the endgame. But typically, yeah, there's a reason why top players play this. I think they don't play it in top level classical chess, but it's worth learning for your blitz play, and especially against players in minor and major sections. So obviously under 2000 you've got a really good chance of beating a lot of people with this simple idea. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. Maybe you could check it out. I'll leave a link into the study in case you wanted to have a look through a few positions, and hope this helps your chess. Alright, I'll see you later.